Hello, Year 6. So, Wednesday, 3rd of February, we are looking at our big read today. As ever, we're going to start with the starter. Nice place to start. So, your starter today is looking at pages 75 and 76 of chapter 7. So, you're going to need the text in front of you for this. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to read over those 2 pages, and as you're reading, I'd like you to have a table drawn out in your books that should be split into 3 separate columns. Those columns need to be adjectives, verbs, and adverbs, just as it says there. And what I'd like you to do is, as you're reading over pages 75 and 76, I'd like you to note down powerful adjectives in your adjectives column, powerful verbs in your verbs column, powerful adverbs in your adverbs column. The idea for this is 2 parts, really. Firstly, it's to check that you understand what adjectives, verbs, and adverbs are, something that we should all understand. It is, after all, a year 3-4 objective. It's actually as low down as year 1 and 2 for understanding adjectives and verbs. So we should absolutely be understanding those. But secondly, it's also to give you a good bank of powerful vocabulary that Maz Evans herself uses. So when we come to doing our hot right, and you're trying to make this story that you write sound like it's sort of in the style of Maz Evans and in keeping with her tone, well, using the sort of vocabulary that she uses is going to be one of the best ways to do that. So that's your starter, please. I'd like you to spend about 5 minutes on that, because it is only a starter, so you shouldn't be spending ages and ages on it. I would say 5 minutes to read over that, noting things down, is about right. If you go a little bit over, that's fair enough, but it should take you around about 5 minutes. When you've done that, start this video up again, and I'll talk to you then about, firstly, a recap of yesterday's lesson, but then today's main activity. Pause the video here, have a go at that activity. Speak to you in a moment when you've done. Okay, a quick recap then on yesterday's lesson. Yesterday was Tuesday, which means it must have been our literal retrieval session, since we're sticking to the same days, same activities each day, each week, just to try and have that consistency and really ingrain and consolidate that learning to make it really, really competent and make us confident in our reading skills. So a recap then. Let's have a look at some of those questions from yesterday. The first question, or question number 2, because we went over question 1 together. Question 2 for green was, what does the prisoner request before he tells Virgo how to get out? And the answer was that the prisoner requests a drink of water before he tells Virgo how to get out of the cave. Remember, you use the answer to the question and you repeat the question in your answer. We do that by skimming and scanning through the text, looking for key words. In this case, the words that I would have been looking for would probably have been prisoner. I'd have chosen prisoner over Virgo, although I'd have looked out for both, just because I know that Virgo comes up quite a lot. So you're trying to look for any unusual words that you think, they don't come up very often. So if it does come up, if I see it, it's probably going to be where my answer needs to be. And question number 2 for orange, I'll let you read over this one yourself. It was a true or false question. Remember, when we're doing the true or false questions, they will always purposefully, whoever is setting the questions, in this case, me, but in the reading paper, it's whoever the exam board are, they will try and make it, if it is true, they will make it sound like it might be false. They will word it differently to how it's worded in the text to try and make you think it might be false. So they'll use synonyms to try and trip you over. When it's actually false, they'll try and make it sound true by using elements of truth. And in this case, I used elements of truth. Now, Elliot does give the figure, who we find out is prisoner 42. He does give the figure a cup of water. However, the figure doesn't give Elliot the cup. I've sort of twisted it round. Elliot goes and fills it with water and then gives it to the figure. The figure doesn't give him it to go and fill it up. So I've used some element of truth to try and trip you up. And that's what questioners will do. They're always trying to make sure you've read carefully, not just glossed over it and skimmed it all. We only use skimming and scanning to find our answers once we have already read it in enough detail. So don't forget that. Number 2 for red. I did tell you, and it won't always do this, but I used a tough word in this one. And I did that because it was the red challenge. I used the word justification. Now, justification means sort of your reason behind doing something. What's a good word for justification? Sort of your sort of idea behind it, why you're doing it, why it's important to do. Reasoning, I think, is probably the best one. So why or how did Elliot justify, what was his reason for ignoring Virgo's rules? Now, there were some interesting answers here. I put one on the screen, which is the reason given more directly in the text, and that is because he sees the rules as being for immortals, not for humans. That's the reason given in the text, and this is a retrieval lesson, so that's the answer I was expecting for retrieval. However, the inference behind that decision, and we're moving on to inference today, the inference behind Elliot deciding to ignore Virgo is because he's worried about his mum. And Thanatos, who is prisoner 42, who is this stranger who's chained to the rock, promises him that he can help him. And that desire to help Elliot's mum overwhelms his loyalty to Virgo and overwhelms his good sense. So he ignores Virgo in the hope that Thanatos can support and help him with his mum and maybe make her better, because we can see she's not very well. So that is sort of the inference behind it. And some of you did give me that too, which was very impressive. But remember, when we're looking for retrieval, the answers are in the text. Speaking of inference, our Walt today, for Wednesday, as it always will be, is to answer inference questions. And we're hoping to identify inference from provided evidence. That's where I've given you evidence already and you tell me what the inference would be, just like we practiced last week. Or to identify the evidence. So I give you an inference and you find me the evidence. Or to do the whole thing yourself, using inference to answer questions in enough detail. So 3 different levels of challenge there, which ties in a little bit with our green, orange, and our red. I've gone a bit different today. Rather than relying on the text, what I've done is I've got some pictures to begin with to make us think about inference, because inference isn't always about what we read. It can be about what we see. It's generally about what clues are there in what I'm looking at that tell me more than I'm seeing at first. For example, what I see immediately in this picture is an older person trying to bathe a young child. Could be a dad, we don't know that, but could be. I could infer that it's a dad because that is usually the person who would be bathing a child. If it's an older man, it's normally the dad. But we don't know that, but we can see that. I can see that the child is jumping out of the bath. I can see that he's got something in his hand. I don't know exactly what, some kind of toy. I can see there's a rubber duck in the bath. I can see the bubbles are going everywhere. There's lots of things I can see that I can retrieve. That's sort of like a retrieval question, really, in the text, where the answers are there for you for certain. But what can I infer? So I'd just like you to pause the video briefly and look at the picture and just think, what can you infer from that picture? What can you tell me about how they both feel? What can you tell me about what they may be thinking? Stuff that isn't given you exactly, but you could use evidence for. Have a bit of a think, and then I'm going to show you some questions to make us think about how inference works generally, particularly outside of reading as well. And then we can use those skills within our reading. But pause the video and have a think about what you can actually tell me about that picture, other than just simply what you can see. I'll speak to you again in a second. Okay, so I'm just going to move myself out of the way. As I say, inference is very much your opinion, and it's just to do with your opinion on how characters feel, what they're thinking, what their motivations are, that sort of thing, why they're acting in a certain way, as it says there. But you need to provide evidence for that. And we do this in our day-to-day life all the time. It's kind of how we understand the world. It's how we know if one of our friends or one of our classmates or a teacher, it's how we know if they're not in a very good mood. It's how we know if somebody is sad. It's how we know if somebody's happy. It's how we know if our head teacher is stressed or worried or really carefree and over the moon. We pick up on all those subtle little clues. Normally people don't just sort of sit there going, I'm sad, I'm sad, I'm sad, I'm sad, I'm sad, just telling us. We can't just retrieve it. We have to use the inference skills. We have to see that maybe they're being a bit withdrawn. They're not speaking to other people. They're not hanging out with their friends the usual way. They look sad in their face. Maybe they're crying. Maybe they're keeping themselves away from other people. Maybe they're just being particularly quiet. On the other side, maybe someone's really happy. They come in really bouncy. They're really chatty. They're telling you all about their weekend. They're smiling from ear to ear. They're chatting with everybody. They're going and playing with their friends. These are all things we pick up with inference. And we can do that with this picture here. So I've already asked you to do that. But specifically, what could we pick up about the emotions of the people in this picture? If I put myself over here. So let's use an inference sum then, like we practiced last week, to support some inferences. So I'm going to give you most of the sum and I'd like you to finish it off. Here's my inference. The young boy is really happy. So this child here is really happy. I want you to find me two bits of evidence, really simple, to complete that inference sum. Evidence 1 plus evidence 2 equals proof that the young boy is really happy. Find me two bits of proof, please. Two bits of inference, two bits of evidence. Write them in, or write them in your book, and then I'll have a look when you send them in. And I'll tell you then what I've got for that inference. Pause the video, have a go at that, and then play when you've done. Speak to you in a second. Okay, so my two bits of evidence, the two things that stood out to me, are he's got a really big grin on his face. That's a massive clue that somebody's really happy. Really big smile. Another one that I've added to that, he's splashing water all over the other person, which I know, and you can bring in your own knowledge, that's fine, which I know young children love doing. So he's smiling up, massive beaming grin on his face, and he's splashing water all over the person who I presume is his dad. So that's my inference. Child's got a really big grin on his face, he's splashing water all over his dad, which he loves doing, equals he's really happy. That's how inference works. Simple as that. Two bits of evidence, this is my inference. Simple. So let's try again. Other way around this time though. So I'm going to give you the evidence this time. I want you to tell me what the inference might be. Simple as that. So this time we're going to infer something about the person who I assume is the dad. I want you to tell me what we could infer. So he's leaning back and raising his hand as if to block. Plus his mouth is gaping open as though he's shouting or gasping. So what could my inference be? They're my two bits of evidence. What can I infer using those two bits of evidence? Okay, pause the video, have a think. What could you infer given that those two bits of inference are there? Write it down, play the video when you've done it. Speak to you again in a second. Okay, so that's my inference. You can read it there. I think that those two bits together, those two bits of evidence, suggest that he's shocked, quite taken aback that the child has leapt out of the bath. So that is how inference works. And it works just the same with pictures as it does with text. And vice versa. It works just the same with text as it does with pictures. You just gather your evidence to support what you think. That's all there is to it. Really, really easy. So the technique then of getting more information is immediately apparent. It's exactly the same technique that we use in reading. So just gathering more information from inferences, not just relying on direct retrieval. So this is a section of text from page 75. And I'd like you to think what we could infer from this bit here, or these bits here. So you've got three bits highlighted there. Elliot drew a halting breath. The idea of mum back to her old self overwhelmed him. What could we infer after months of hiding his fears? So we're going to have a look at a classic inference question now, and I'd like you to think, does my model answer work? So, classic question. How has Elliot been feeling about his mother's increasing illness? Give evidence from the text to support your answer. That's a real classic. That's going to be like a 3 to 5 mark question. near the end of one of the texts in a reading paper. You know these, you've seen them. So how can I use the highlighted bits to answer that question? Have a bit of a go. Don't put it in an inference sum. Try writing it as a full answer. That might be a few sentences using quotes with those single inverted commas to show that you're quoting from the text. And then I'll show you what I think a model answer would be. This is sort of what we practiced before with the inference sum. That's kind of your green level challenge. This is now moving on to that orange red level challenge, that age related and pushing to greater depth level challenge, which is where we all want to be really, but we need to take it at our own pace. Some of us get there faster than others. That's how it goes. So how can I use those bits of highlighted text to answer that question? Pause the video, have a go at writing it down, and then you can see my model answer and you can see how your answer and my model answer compare. Okay, speak to you again in a second. Okay, so my model answer is appearing below. Elliot has spent months worrying about his mum and feeling unable to do anything about it. And then that's my inference. That's what I think, my opinion. I then need to back that up with evidence from the text. Just like when we do those inference sums. Here's my inference, here's my evidence. Or here's my evidence, here's my inference. So I've given my inference, now I need to give my evidence. I know this because the idea of his mum, you can put in words if you use squared brackets to make it make sense as you read it. You can add in a word, that's fine. The idea of his mum back to her old self, and then I've done ... because I don't need the rest of the quote, but I do need the end bit, overwhelmed him. You can see that because they're the bits I highlighted. Also, adding on some more evidence, also, he is described as having spent months hiding his fears, full stop. And then a bit more where it goes back to me and my opinion and my knowledge. These two things combined prove that he has been desperately worried about her. So you can see that clear routine. Here's my inference, my opinion. Here's my evidence taken from the text. Here's me consolidating that with a bit of my own knowledge, a bit of my own thought again. That is a greater depth sort of answer. That's where if you're on the red challenges, you need to be aiming, and you are aiming and you are achieving. So well done. Right then, let's have a look at your task for today then. So, main task is nice and simple. In a moment, I'm going to go on to another screen. If you're doing the blue, there is no blue. If you're doing the green challenge, you're going to look at the picture on the following slide, and you're going to use that inference sum idea, evidence plus evidence equals the inference, to answer the questions about the picture. Okay? If you're doing orange and red, you can just let the video play through until we get to your ones. Because after the picture, we move on to the orange and red questions, and they are taken from the text. Orange, if you're doing orange today, you can carry on using the inference sums, just like we practiced last week and just like we've practiced in this video again today. But if you're doing the red challenge, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to answer just like the last slide where we modeled a written answer. So that is if you're doing the red challenge. Okay, so let's look at the green challenge first. Green challenge, you have this picture here. And what I think you'll probably want to do is when you've seen the questions, on the next slide, I would write all the questions down, but then I'd go back on the video so you can see this bigger picture that fills the screen. Because on the next slide with the questions, the picture is much smaller, which will make it harder for you. So go back to the previous screen when you've done. You have 5 questions to have a go at, and they are on the screen now. I'm not going to read them out to you. You're more than capable of doing that. So I would write those questions into your book, and then I'd go back on the video so you can see the larger picture. Remember, you're using the inference sums. So you're having evidence 1 plus evidence 2 equals my inference. And you're doing that 5 times for 5 questions, please. Looking forward to seeing those. You'll have paused now. We'll move on to the orange and red questions. Orange and red then, you're going to have questions coming up for each slide. You'll need to pause on each screen and have the copy of the text in front of you at home, starting with page 75. Your questions will be on the screen. Pause and answer the question. Orange, remember, you're doing it using the inference sum. Red, you are doing it as a proper written response, just like we practiced in this video. Looking forward to seeing them. I'm going to get rid of my picture now off the screen, but you can pause the video each time. But this will be everything from me. Hope seeing some fantastic answers coming back from you. But for now, and from me, that's everything. So goodbye.